Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers, GPB's nightly coverage of the Georgia General Assembly. It's the 10th legislative day of the 2012 session. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up in tonight's program, state departments come under greater scrutiny from the General Assembly as the Senate passes a bill allowing greater legislative oversight. Supporters say the budget process currently doesn't give the General Assembly enough control. More students may become eligible for the Hope Technical College grant. Representative Stacey Carter today files legislation to lower the GPA requirement from 3.0 to 2.5. It's Education Week. Lawmakers, part of GPB's ongoing effort to improve the graduation rate in the state. Tonight's topic, the top 10 educational issues for 2013. I'll be joined by Dr. Steve Dolinger of the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. And on our Reporters Roundtable tonight, Kristina Torres and political insider Jim Galloway, both of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, will help put everything into perspective. All that and more is coming up in Primetime Lawmakers. But first, the Senate today passed a bill that will give the General Assembly the power to eliminate state agencies. Kiosha Howard joins us live from the Capitol with what you could call zero-based bureaucracy. Good evening, Kiosha.
Good evening, Scott. Supporters of the Sunset Law, as it's been deemed, say that the measure would make state government more efficient, while opponents say the bill violates the separation of powers. Sponsor, Senator William Ligon.
The intent is to evaluate the efficiency of state government and the productivity of each agency. And it's meant to make sure that we're utilizing our state resources and taxpayer money in the most efficient way possible.
Now, I think and feel that there's a process already here to deal with this, and it's called Georgia. It's got a General Assembly, a governor, and a set of judges. I think you have a separation of powers issue, which I don't know that you can overcome. I don't think you can justify or that the executive branch, which is the third part, who operates the state government on a daily basis and who appoints the commissioner of these agencies, I don't think you can take away his responsibility by passing a joint resolution of the General Assembly.
The bill passed 37 to 12. Its sponsors held a press conference to explain the need for this type of legislation.
We're elected to represent the people of the state, and we want to examine the purposes and the efficiencies of our state government and consider whether we should enhance and improve those programs and agencies or possibly consolidate, privatize, or eliminate agencies. We must reduce the size of government to meet our government revenues, not increase our revenues to meet the size of government. And this legislation, for the first time ever, allows us to do just that.
Senator Hill also noted that similar powers already exist, but that this bill gives legislators time to look more deeply into state agencies and programs.
The budgetary process, as you know, doesn't allow us to do make a zero-based budgeting analysis. And we only have 40 legislative days. Those 40 legislative days, so much is happening. We need, frankly, 12 months and maybe a couple of years to review agencies to actually see if they meet the mandates of our state constitution.
If the bill becomes law, it would create a joint committee to review state agencies. A mandate says that 2 of the committee members need to be the governor's floor leaders, which sponsors say addresses the concern that the bill violates the separation of powers. Also today, the Senate passed a measure that seeks to raise the homestead exemption. Senator Jesse Stone says the bill could help Georgians during hardships.
When people suffer job loss, catastrophic illness, divorce, business failure, their homes are at risk. And what we're trying to do in SB 117 is to reduce that risk by a small amount. This only exempts the equity that debtors may have in their homes in bankruptcy or when they are threatened with loss through levy and sale.
The bill passed out of the Senate unanimously. Both the homestead legislation and the governmental oversight bill both go over to the House. Reporting live from the state capitol, I'm Kiosha Howard for Primetime Lawmakers.
It could be a very big deal for embattled homeowners. Thank you very much, Kiosha. Moving on to some committee action. Water everywhere. Not a drop to vote on, at least not on Georgia State Park Lakes, where Department of Natural Resources signs are posted. Today, the Senate Natural Resources and Environment Committee gave a do-pass recommendation to a bill prohibiting boats on state park lakes and other areas when the Department of Natural Resources has posted a notice. Currently, due to its environmental and safety concerns, the DNR places certain restrictions on the use of boats on state park lakes, but this bill expands restrictions to the use of any boat in any park, historic site, or recreational area when DNR signs are posted. Next stop for the bill, the Senate Rules Committee. The committee also heard from a report from Kevin Clark of the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority, or GEFA. GEFA is charged with developing and implementing the governor's water supply program, which assists local governments in developing a new water source or water sources to meet future needs. The report recommended public-private partnerships coordinated by GEFA and local governments to facilitate water supply projects, including building new reservoirs, desalination and projects, and constructing wells. Now let's go back to the Capitol, where primetime lawmaker Sandra Torres says both House and Senate Democrats continue to look for ways to make Hope scholarships accessible to students. What happened today, Sandra?
That's right, Scott. House Democrats held another public hearing as part of their series dealing with their legislative agenda this session. Today is focused on the HOPE and a bill by Representative Stacey Evans aimed at helping Georgia's technical college students to receive the HOPE grant. The bill by Representative Stacey Evans lowers the GPA requirement to 2.5 for technical college students receiving the HOPE grant. For the first time this fall, students were required to make a 3.0 to qualify.
4,200 students lost their HOPE grant as a result of the changes in the GPA requirement. And keep in mind that before the changes last year, there was no GPA requirement at all to retain the HOPE grant. This was something that we did new last year.
At today's public hearing, House members heard from Senator Jason Carter, who's introduced a bill to bring back means testing for HOPE with a family income cap of $140,000.
Under the current plan, by 2016, maybe earlier, the HOPE scholarship will pay for less than half the cost of going to college. This projection was not provided to anyone last year. There are a number of people who supported this legislation who did not intend this outcome.
Ray Washington was the only college student to speak at the hearing. He tells us he's in favor of doing whatever it takes to give students more access to HOPE.
I'm a beneficiary of the HOPE scholarship. My mother benefited from the HOPE grant. She supports me, getting me through school along with my father. And HOPE is giving a lot of people hope. So to cut is to essentially take the opportunity for people to have social mobility. So it's important that we keep HOPE at its current status as far as funding it and expand it to be all-encompassing.
And while not addressing specific proposals, Speaker David Ralston said last week he knows something needs to be done.
Obviously, we have to continue to monitor the health of HOPE. We undertook some revisions to the program last year. I'm hoping that we will not have to revisit that in a major kind of way anytime soon.
But I am told that at least 2 Republican House members have signed on to Representative Evans' bill regarding the HOPE grant, Representatives Earl Earhart and Ron Stevens. Reporting live, I'm Sandra Parrish for Primetime Lawmakers.
Sandra, just so there's no confusion, we're talking about the HOPE grant, not the HOPE scholarship itself. The HOPE grant applies to technical school students, right?
That is correct. And Representative Evans' bill actually would reduce the GPA to 2.5. Last year's changes brought it up to 3. She said more than 4,000 students have lost that HOPE grant because of those changes, and that's what she would like to change.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And the governor wants skills-ready workers coming out of Georgia schools. It's Education Week here on Primetime Lawmakers, all part of GPB's effort to improve the graduation rate. And every night this week, we'll be featuring a different education topic with expert guests to keep you informed on the important education issues in Georgia. Tonight, it's the top 10 issues to watch in education. And I'm joined by Dr. Steve Dolinger, president of the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. It's great to have you back on GPB. We had a chance to talk some in-depth last year in primetime politics. Great to see you again.
It's good to be back, Scott. Thank you.
Refresh our viewers on just what the partnership does.
We're a policy and research organization. We're a nonprofit that was created by the Georgia Chamber and the Georgia Economic Development Association actually 20 years ago this year.
20 years.
20 years.
And you have a pretty nifty report that's just out.
Thank you.
That talks about the top 10 things the partnership would like to see happen. Let's run that list down very quickly here. I think we've got it that we can show folks at home. Number 1, how good are our schools? Georgia's new performance standards. Number 2, assessing teachers from highly qualified to highly effective. Number 3, implementation of Common Core. Number 4, challenges to rural schools. Number 5, the new normal, Georgia's education financing. Number 6, Georgia's pre-K program, quality and quantity. Number 7, choice, where do we go from here? Number 8, economic development pipeline, the role of education. Number 9, leadership and ethics in our public schools. Number 10, where's the glue, tying it all together? That is certainly an ambitious list of things to have to tackle at one time, but it's a complicated subject, isn't it?
It really is, and these aren't the only issues in Georgia, but there are 10 of the important ones, and they're not in rank order either. And as we talk about them, I think people see that they're intertwined.
Let's talk a little bit about some of these. Okay. And I realize they're all important, but let's dwell on a couple. For instance, just how good are Georgia schools? A concern not only to parents, but to businesses as well. Businesses cite the #1 concern they have is an educated workforce.
Absolutely, and if we have that education pipeline working like it should, we'll eventually get better workers. Good news is we're doing better on almost all the metrics, our state tests and national tests, like the National Assessment of Education Progress, called the Nation's Report Card. Every other year when that's given, we're doing better. In fact, in this year's edition, we have 10 metrics to watch from that birth to work pipeline. And in some of those, Georgia's doing better than the national average, but in most of them, we still have a lot of work to do.
And as far as the national rankings are concerned, are we in the top third, middle third, or bottom third?
It depends on the metric. There are some, like number of students taking advanced placement courses, where we're in the top 20 states in the country. There's others like the old graduation rate where it's still not where we'd like it to be.
Okay, let's move on to another one. Assessing teachers. This can really hit on some nerves. You know, parents want better teachers. Teachers say, hey, we deserve a right to have a list of objective criteria. How do you decide which teachers need to stay in our schools?
Well, that's being debated right now with the career letter task force that Georgia has. As part of the No Child Left Behind and now part of Race to the Top, the most important ingredient for student success is a quality teacher. So how do you identify that? What we're doing in Georgia now is working on a new teacher evaluation and actually a new leader evaluation system so we can better determine what makes an effective teacher. Part of that's going to be student achievement, but we're trying to decide what would be the other pieces around that.
Yeah, student achievement is measuring the success the teacher's having with each child.
Right.
We talked a little bit last year that it's sort of subjective right now on how teachers are graded. I mean, an administrator comes into the classroom, spends 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes 2 or 3 minutes a year, and goes, yeah, he or she's doing okay. Do we need something a little more concrete than that?
Absolutely. In the past, teachers have been graded okay or not okay, and 90-some% of them are okay. We need to be much more efficient about how we can discern that. And I think many teachers across the state are saying, I'm willing to be held accountable. Just make it fair. Let me be involved in the process and know there's a pre-test and a post-test for my students. That's okay, but make sure that it's fair for the process.
Moving on to another issue, implementation of Common Core. Now, this may surprise a few people because it's really just beginning to come to the forefront, and we're talking about a Common Core of curriculum that 45 other states are looking at doing. Is it the same curriculum as those other 45 states we're looking at?
Yes, it is. And the good news is that Georgia has just increased our standards, called the Georgia Performance Standards. So doing a crosswalk from those standards to the Common Core that have been adopted by these 40-some states, we're very close to that. In fact, Georgia's receiving high marks from outside organizations around the country with our standards. But there is some concern among parents that this is a federal curriculum, and what does that mean for my child? Mm-hmm. But since Georgia's adopting that and these other states, I think it's exactly where we need to go. Parents who move from Massachusetts to Atlanta or from Atlanta to Texas should have some assurance that there's similar curriculum across our country.
And one of the things I'm noticing here inside Common Core are college and readiness benchmarks that hit international standards. So American kids can compete with kids from China and Eastern Europe and even South America.
That's the plan. And our State Superintendent, John Barge, has a new performance index that wants to make sure that students are college and career ready. We're waiting for the U.S. Department of Education to give us the green light on that.
What's the timeline on that?
We're hoping to hear something this month, but we don't know what's really holding that up.
We're a statewide broadcast. Challenges to rural schools. 34% of the kids in Georgia schools are considered rural. How does a rural system compete with a metro Atlanta system that has a much bigger tax base?
Well, they struggle, Scott. They really do. They just don't have the infrastructure and the funding there. Part of the answer can be, which is another one of these, is with choice and charter schools, that if we have a virtual program, some of these systems that don't have a physics teacher can bring that teacher in virtually through technology, but they struggle. And when they don't have the resources, they don't have, back to the quality teachers, they're going to struggle. If we're going to raise the achievement of all of our students, we have to help raise up rural Georgia too.
And it takes money. Another one of these initiatives here is the new normal, Georgia's education financing. Now, what do you mean by the new normal? Working with less?
Yes. And what does that mean? With the State Teacher of the Year was at our media symposium a couple weeks ago, and he said, you know, doing more with less means we weren't doing well with what we had before. We need to continue to work hard. But when we are looking at budgets for school systems that are 85–90% human resources, you can nibble around the edges and put off purchasing buses and put off purchasing textbooks for a while, but you've got to start getting at people. So that's why now we're having to increase class sizes, putting staff on furloughs. So Unfortunately, it's the new normal, and we don't know how long that's going to last.
This is fast. We could talk about this all night. But one more, pre-K. Now, the governor's made it a priority. He wanted 10 more days added to the pre-K program. How does pre-K, getting to kids before they get to school, fit into all this?
Well, we commend the governor for jumping on this one. That's the beginning of the pipeline, or at least an early part of the pipeline. And economists around the country, not just educators, but economists have said that there is a significant return on investment to put money in early learning. We've heard everywhere from 4 to 1 or 7 to $1 return on investment, because those students who are in pre-K tend to more than graduate from high school on time, more of them own a home, more of them have higher income.
And you got some solid data on this.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of data on that. That's a good place to invest our money.
Well, there's a lot to talk about in the top 10 issues to watch in the coming years. The Georgia Partnership in Education, thank you for bringing it to our attention. We'll watch how Georgia Education measures up. We're going to get you back.
Oh, love to come back. Thank you, Scott.
Steve Dolinger, it's great to see you again.
Thank you.
Falsely reporting a crime would no longer be considered a felony, but it could still cost you a $10,000 fine under legislation considered by the Senate Judiciary Committee today. The measure, sponsored by Senator Butch Miller, would change the offense from a felony to a misdemeanor. The bill is meant to provide a new offense of transmitting a false report of a crime, punishable by up to 5 years in prison and/or a fine up to $10,000. The legislation received a due pass recommendation and moves on to Senate rules. U.S. Congressman Phil Gingrey paid a visit to the state Senate this morning. He encouraged bipartisan efforts in balancing the state budget. Watch.
I truly believe, and I think you still are able to come together and work hard to do things across the aisle in a bipartisan way. And indeed, you have to. You have to balance the budget each and every year. And unfortunately, where I am now in the Congress of the United States, we cannot even get a balanced budget amendment passed. The last time before this most recent vote that we addressed the issue was 16 years ago. In that 16-year period of time, we have literally increased the national debt by $9 trillion.
Congressman Gingrey served 2 years as a state senator here in Georgia. He was elected to represent Georgia's 11th district in Congress in 2002. We'll take a short break of Primetime Lawmakers, but don't go anywhere. We're going to be joined by two legislative experts, Kristina Torres and political insider Jim Galloway of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. If you're interested in this process, especially some breaking news in the Hope Scholarship, you want to stick around for that. Well, the week is just getting started, but it promises to be a long and eventful one. The General Assembly is scheduled to be in session all 5 days. All the more reason to bring on our panel of journalists to cut through the political speak and help us get right to the point. Joining me tonight is Kristina Torres. She's a journalist with more than 16 years of experience. She joined the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in 2003. And Jim Galloway, also with the AJC. He's been covering politics for more than 30 years, writes the Political Insider column. It's great to have you both here. We've got a lot to talk about here this early on in the session. And, you know, you specialized in education for many, many years for the AJC, Kristina. What do you think about these 10 initiatives we just heard from the Georgia, the folks in the Georgia Education Partnership?
Well, the partnership, it's wonderful. They always are on top of things. I mean, and as usual, you might see sort of same things on the list that they've talked about before. It's because education is just such a big thing. It's more than half the budget, you know, for the state year after year. So I mean, the issues they talk about will be ongoing for years even after.
Will they get hammered, Jim, on local control? I mean, local property taxes for Common Core and things like that?
Absolutely. You can see it coming up in this debate over charter schools in Georgia. We've got legislation moving that would make it legal again, once again, for the state to force county school systems to issue charter schools. And, of course, you're mandating Cherokee or Cobb or Henry or whatever spend a specific amount of money on a specific school in a specific style. That's the big hurdle there is a constitutional amendment. That's 2/3 in both chamber. It's going to be a tough hurdle.
But then the public has to vote on it as well.
The public would have to vote, and bear in mind, I mean, not only do local counties and the local school boards not like this, but you also have the teacher groups, which also don't like this.
So, in essence, a group could go around their local school board to set up a charter school if this passes.
And that's what was happening. That was the grounds for this lawsuit that the Supreme Court decided.
You had a piece online at ajc.com this afternoon on this measure we talked about earlier. State agencies could sunset unless renewed. I call that zero-based bureaucracy. What's the chance of that?
You may have just given them a new pitch line.
Go ahead.
You know, it's interesting. I'm watching this. The House will need to vote on their version. What we wound up having voted on today in the Senate is something that came out of conference committees for the Senate and the House over the weekend. Senate took their action. They're really for it. They loved it, introduced it last year. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the House, and I'm not really sure the governor is going to support it.
Turf battles here on that, won't there?
Absolutely.
There'll be a lot of them.
You always have that. Specifically on the House side, they don't like to be told what to do with the budget, and this gets at their core issue.
A bill to reward snitches and sniff out government fraud in Georgia. I just love the word snitch. And Jim, you popped that this evening in your column.
This is HB 822. Ed Lindsey, House Majority Whip, is the lead author, but it also has two other Republican lawyers and Mary Margaret Oliver, who is a very big in the legal community. She's a Democrat out of Decatur, so it's truly bipartisan. They wrote the bill, and it offers, it would offer well, let's say maybe snitch is too hard. It would offer an informer a 15 to 25% cut of fines levied or income returned under a case of fraud. Now, we already have a law right now that applies to Medicaid, but this would also extend it to anything in state government, anything in county government, local school boards, the CRCT scandal. It's a very, very wide reach.
And on top of that, if anything, I'm getting the notion the state is getting very serious about collecting money that's left on the table. Missing taxes that are being, frittered away by fraud. Senator Hill, in fact, just last week said that they have an identity theft unit inside the Department of Revenue that is just coming online to start to identify some of those things. Is that a theme you're seeing down there, Kristina?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and given the times we're in economically, I mean, they want all the money they can get. So, the debate would be how far have you cut other places, but in this case, it's almost low-hanging fruit. You might as well try and go after it.
And you could get into some truly philosophical arguments here. Grover Norquist, the Americans for Tax Reform president, it's a very anti-tax group. He was at the Capitol last week in a closed meeting with conservative Republicans, and he said, I'm told that if the state government increases the number of revenue of agents or people, if they try to go over, try to bump up state revenue by going after this low-hanging fruit, that amounts to a tax increase.
Interesting.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. I thought it was money they were already owed. Well, $19.2 billion is the state budget. Do we have any feel for how much money is being left on the ground here? Has anyone come up with a number? Is it 100 million, 300 million? What is it? Anybody know?
Well, during if you'll recall, there was the debate over the county matches between business licenses granted and the state revenue department that had where the licensed businesses were not sending in their sales tax revenue, and they were saying tens of millions of dollars, I think, at that point, but you don't truly know. There was only a pilot program that looked at it.
A significant chunk of change. And we're still trying to divide up what there is of the Hope Scholarship Funds in a move today that would lower the threshold for the Hope Grant from 3.0 to a GPA 2.5 for kids to be able to retain the Hope Grant, which is for technical college education. Does this match up with the governor's initiative?
Well, the pushing for the Hope changes, I think, is a Democratic issue this year. There were changes made last year that were backed by a deal in the Republicans. The Democrats see this as an issue that they can make sort of news. They can give them a place at the table. I do think the Senate Democrats are sort of unveiled their agenda with this first. They're pushing, trying to push through changes with the Higher Education Committee in the Senate, and I think there's some openness. You're not going to see big changes, but there's some openness, I think, on the Republican sides to consider something. No one wants this to run out in an election year.
I think Stacey Evans' suggestion of lowering the technical school grade point average from 3 to 2.5, it can fit within the Governor Nathan Deal's agenda of increasing technical graduates for the Georgia economy.
And that proposal's in the Senate as well, and I do think that's something that there could be a compromise on.
Is there any appetite for an income cap for the Hope Scholarship?
No, I don't. Not on the Republican side.
Not for a couple of years. But I thought if I could bring in the State of the Union address, the Republican response to the State of the Union address, Mitch Daniels, the governor of Indiana, he endorsed Social Security income caps. Mm-hmm. And that's a philosophical breach that could ultimately flow down here.
Okay. You brought up something that's interesting. Cracking open the T-SPLOST list, the transportation sales tax lists that have been set. I mean, they adhere to a timetable, and now some folks in Cobb County would like to open it up again and trade bus or rail service for what?
Roads.
Asphalt.
Roads.
In a word.
Reversible lane. This was the roundtables and all of the 10 counties that are the 10 areas of Georgia that are pitching the transportation sales tax. Mm-hmm. They formed those lists in mid-October. Yeah. All right. And what happened was in December, Governor Nathan Deal looked at this a proposal for a public-private partnership. Say that fast. That would build additional lanes up 75 and I-575 mm-hmm. toll lanes mm-hmm. that would be reversed depending on the time of day. But in that contract, which was signed under Governor Sonny Perdue, it said that the state would have to essentially sign away sovereignty over roads built in that area. They would have to get the private company's permission to build roads in that area for the next 60 to 70 years, simply because the company would not want the competition. So he killed that deal.
Right.
All right. Now what happens is then Tim Lee, the commission chairman of Cobb County, he comes up and he says, well, if this was our great hope, we can't have this die, and I'll sacrifice the rail that we were going to push up from Atlanta into Smyrna in order to get those reversible lanes.
Well, and what raised a few eyebrows, though, is Tim was on that original big group mm-hmm. coming up with the list to begin with, and as it happens, Tim is also up for re-election.
Yes. There's a little problem here, though. I mean, you're talking about people paying a sales tax on something and then coming back and paying a toll on it later?
Yes. Think about how the campaign ad is going to sell that one. I think there's just some impatience with Deal to find a funding source for those reversible lanes, and if he can do that, and he's got his eye on a couple, I think the problem's solved.
Thank you very much. Great to have you both with us.
Thank you.
Coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, we continue our Education Week with University System Chancellor Hank Huckabee and Technical College System Deputy Commissioner Josephine Reed Taylor, part of GPB's ongoing commitment to improving the graduation rate. If you missed any part of this broadcast, see it tomorrow morning again at 5:30 a.m. Coming up next at GPB, it's Georgia Traveler. The Traveler team goes deep sea fishing in Savannah, celebrates Buggy Days in Barnesville, and takes in the Booth Western Art Museum in Cartersville, and rollerblades through Atlanta. All that and much more coming up next on Georgia Traveler. And that's our broadcast for this 10th legislative day of the 2012 session. I'm Scott Slade. Be here tomorrow night at 7 for Primetime Lawmakers.
This is a GPB original production.